Baltimore, autumn 1834. A dockworker, unloading cargo at the bustling inner harbor, made a discovery so horrific it would shake the very core of American medical education. Buried beneath layers of salt and ice inside a Euro-bound merchant vessel were 17 human bodies, perfectly preserved, each marked with the clean, deliberate incisions of a master surgeon. The ship's manifest described them blandly as medical specimens from St. Thomas Medical University, a respected Catholic school in rural Maryland. But to the dockworker, one face was unmistakable. The body bore a unique scar he had seen many times before. It belonged to his own nephew, a promising young man who had reportedly died of fever while studying at St. Thomas. What investigators uncovered next revealed a conspiracy stretching back more than 3 decades, a web of greed, betrayal, and murder that funneled over $800,000 in blood, money into the coffers of a respected family of physicians. Adjusted for today, that's nearly $25 million. The Walsh family had transformed their hallowed institution into America's most profitable house of horrors, feeding Europe's elite universities a steady stream of human bodies, and the proof, flesh and bone, was rotting in the belly of a ship about to cross the Atlantic. Before we uncover the chilling story of the Walsh medical dynasty, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. This channel brings you the darkest, most true accounts from America's haunted past, and I'd love to know in the comments what state you're watching from. What began in a ship's hold would soon expose a network of corruption reaching from the Catholic Church itself to the lecture halls of Europe's most prestigious medical schools. St. Thomas Medical University sat proudly amid the rolling hills of western Maryland, 40 miles from Baltimore. Founded in 1798 by Dr. Michael Walsh, it was hailed as one of the nation's finest Catholic medical institutions. Its mission to train Irish and German Catholic doctors to serve a rapidly growing immigrant population. The 3-story brick building, crowned with a modest bell tower and cross, housed lecture halls, laboratories, and a small chapel where students attended daily mass. Michael Walsh, tall, broad-shouldered, with sharp blue eyes and perfectly kept silver hair, radiated authority. Born in County Cork, Ireland, he studied at Trinity College Dublin before emigrating to America in 1795 with ambitions of building a medical empire. His wife, Dr. Margaret Walsh, served as dean, an astonishing role for a woman in an era when female physicians were almost unheard of. Trained at Edinburgh, she was famed for her surgical precision and encyclopedic knowledge of anatomy. Students found her brilliance inspiring, but her cold, penetrating demeanor was intimidating in equal measure. The final pillar of the Walsh leadership was Dr. James Walsh, Michael's younger brother and professor of anatomy. Where Michael charmed and Margaret commanded, James was deliberate and exacting. His anatomy lectures were legendary, not just for their thoroughness, but for the uncanny quality of the cadavers he provided. While other schools made do with poorly preserved bodies, often stolen from graves, St. Thomas somehow always had an abundant supply of fresh, perfectly maintained specimens. This reputation drew students from across the eastern seaboard, especially young men from poor Catholic families. Many worked menial jobs for years just to afford the steep tuition, nearly $200 annually. A huge sum when laborers earned little more than $300 a year. St. Thomas offered a work-study program, allowing students to offset costs by assisting with the school's operations. More than anything, the school's prestige rested on its practical training. Students didn't just learn from books. They honed their skills on real human anatomy. The school's dissection hall boasted the finest surgical tools of the era, and, disturbingly, what seemed like an endless flow of bodies to practice on. To the residents of Emmitsburg, the university was a blessing. Local businesses thrived, families rented rooms to students, and Dr. Michael Walsh often stood in Catholic pulpits, preaching about the sacred duty of medicine as an act of service to God. But behind the polite smiles and Sunday sermons, something malignant had taken root. The Walsh family's unmatched access to fresh bodies and their secluded location, far from prying urban eyes, made them perfectly positioned for something far darker than the noble mission they preached. Trouble first whispered through the school in spring 1799, less than a year after it opened. Patrick O'Brien, a 19-year-old from Boston, whose family had sacrificed everything for his education, vanished just weeks before graduation. Records showed Patrick had been struggling academically. He had agreed to attend extra anatomy sessions with Dr. James Walsh in hopes of improving his grades. His roommate, Thomas Mackenzie, later recalled that Patrick had seemed uneasy in the days before he disappeared, speaking of odd noises from the anatomy lab at night and hinting at special procedures James Walsh had recently introduced. On May 15th, Patrick left his dorm around 9 p.m., telling Thomas he was heading to the lab for more study. He never came back. When Thomas reported him missing, President Michael Walsh personally handled the matter. His explanation: Patrick had suffered a breakdown, overwhelmed by the stress of medical training and the grim realities of anatomical study. He claimed Patrick left before dawn, taking only the essentials and leaving a note no one but Walsh ever saw, saying he was abandoning his studies and asking that his parents not be contacted. The president assured the students this wasn't unusual. Some young men, he said, simply weren't prepared for the demands of medicine. The true unease over Patrick O'Brien's disappearance began not with the night he vanished, but 2 weeks later, when his parents arrived at St. Thomas Medical University. They had heard nothing from their son, despite his habit of writing home regularly in the reception hall. They were met by Dr. Margaret Walsh. Her manner was polite, yet distant, the tone of someone delivering an unwelcome fact, without allowing any room for doubt. She repeated the official version. Patrick had suffered a breakdown and chosen to leave. When Mrs. O'Brien requested to see her son's belongings or the letter he supposedly left, Margaret explained that Patrick had instructed all his possessions be donated to charity, and that the items had already been distributed among needy students. Patrick's father, a dock worker who had sacrificed years of wages to send his son to medical school, grew visibly angry. He insisted Patrick had shown no sign of despair in his recent letters. If anything, he had been full of enthusiasm about his studies. Margaret remained unmoved, suggesting that young men often hid their struggles from family and that Patrick's collapse had been sudden. The O'Briens tried to take their concerns to the local sheriff, but William Hawkins, a close friend of the Walsh family, who often dined at their home, concluded his investigation within days. Students interviewed claimed Patrick had seemed troubled. Dr. James Walsh provided meticulous medical records, indicating Patrick's grades were slipping, along with notes of supposed conversations where Patrick expressed doubt about becoming a doctor. What no one outside the Walsh family knew was that Patrick had, in fact, attended his late-night study session with James Walsh on May 15th, but it was no tutoring session. It was what James privately called a comprehensive practical examination, an invitation to the basement laboratory that didn't appear on any official floor plans. The entrance was hidden behind a bookshelf in James's office. Inside, the young man was told he'd be undergoing advanced anatomical training using methods practiced in the finest medical schools of Europe. James presented chloroform as part of the lesson, claiming it would help simulate the conditions of real surgery. Patrick had no idea the dosage was designed not to sedate, but to kill, calibrated to cause respiratory failure without leaving obvious signs of violence. As Patrick slipped into unconsciousness, thinking he was furthering his education, James began the process that had become his grim specialty: preservation. Using an advanced combination of arsenic, mercury, and alcohol-based solutions, he replaced the blood in Patrick's body with chemicals that would keep it lifelike for months. The skin retained its natural tone, The joints stayed flexible, a perfect teaching specimen. Within days, Patrick's body was sealed inside a shipping crate, packed with salt and ice, and sent to Baltimore. From there, it was loaded onto a ship bound for Edinburgh. The University of Edinburgh, desperate for top-quality cadavers, paid $500 for each preserved body, more than double the average American's yearly wage. That first killing became the blueprint for an operation that would last 36 years, claiming at least 156 young lives. The Walsh family's position as respected educators gave them both access to victims and plausible cover stories for their disappearances. Families too far away or too poor to investigate accepted the university's word. Over time, their process became more methodical. Ideal targets were students from distant towns, with little money, few friends on campus, and mediocre grades that could explain an abrupt departure. Many were drawn in through advanced study opportunities, special programs, promising extra training, but designed to isolate them from their peers. Margaret Walsh, as dean, kept exhaustive records on every student, their academic standing, financial situation, and family ties. Those details became a catalog for potential victims. Meanwhile, James refined the basement laboratory into a state-of-the-art killing chamber disguised as an anatomy theater, multiple dissection tables, the best surgical tools, and an elaborate preservation setup decades ahead of its time. His multi-stage embalming process, draining blood, injecting preservative into vital organs, and treating the body externally, produced specimens unrivaled anywhere in Europe. Michael Walsh managed the business side, leveraging his Catholic credentials and international connections. He sold their specimens to universities in Edinburgh, London, Paris, and Dublin, claiming they came from hospital donations and parish connections. The schools, trusting a fellow Catholic physician and desperate for quality cadavers, paid top dollar, never suspecting the true source of the bodies they received. Over time, the Walsh family perfected a system for moving their specimens overseas. Each body was sealed inside a custom-built crate, outwardly indistinguishable from standard medical supply shipments. Packed with salt, ice, and sawdust, the containers kept the cargo cold enough to survive the long voyage across the Atlantic. The shipping labels bore the names of reputable medical institutions, and the paperwork described the contents as anatomical specimens or research materials. Their arrangement with several shipping companies meant these crates became a regular sight among Baltimore's outbound cargo. To the dockworkers and clerks, it was simply routine commerce. Alongside the physical operation ran a meticulous paper trail, one crafted to explain away every disappearance. For each victim, the Walsh family compiled academic reports, notes of declining performance, and even manufactured accounts of personal or disciplinary troubles. On occasion, they forged letters written in James Walsh's careful, elegant hand addressed to families, claiming the student had left voluntarily. The letters spoke of shame, money troubles, or a crisis of faith in their profession. In Emmitsburg, life went on. The university's reputation only grew. Its graduates were hailed for their exceptional surgical skill and unmatched anatomical training. Businesses thrived on the trade the school brought. The Walshes remained pillars of the community, generous donors to the church, frequent sponsors of local events. Even Sheriff Hawkins, who had investigated several disappearances, rarely questioned their explanations, his friendship with the family clouding any suspicion. The murders followed a deliberate rhythm. Each year, 4 to 6 students were selected to die. Winter was the preferred season. Not only did the cooler months slow decomposition, but it also allowed time to collect multiple bodies before arranging a shipment. Conveniently, this period overlapped with the university's most grueling academic schedule, making a sudden departure seem plausible. By 1810, just 12 years after Patrick O'Brien's death, the Walsh family had murdered 43 students, earning over $200,000 from their European clients. Flush with success, They expanded their facilities, and even discussed increasing output. But success brought visibility, and soon, whispers began reaching beyond Maryland's borders. The first real threat came in spring 1811. Father Timothy O'Malley, a stern, disciplined priest with a reputation for thoroughness, arrived from Boston, acting as an unofficial go-between for Irish Catholic families and educational institutions. He had been contacted by over a dozen families in Boston and New York. Each story was eerily similar: a promising student, a sudden academic decline, and a departure in the dead of night, followed by silence. O'Malley began reviewing the cases. In every file, the student was said to have struggled academically in their final weeks, despite strong previous performance. In every case, there was no goodbye to friends or classmates, and in every case, the only word the families received was a letter not from their son, but from the university. When he arrived at St. Thomas, Michael Walsh welcomed him warmly, offering full cooperation. Walsh explained that the school's high standards were not for everyone. The stress, especially for boys from poor backgrounds, could be overwhelming. But interviews with current students painted a more unsettling picture. Some spoke of strange noises from the basement at night, from areas students were told to avoid. Others hinted that the special study opportunities offered to struggling students felt off, though they couldn't say exactly why. More troubling still, several mentioned that the students who had left had been enthusiastic about their work in their final days. Hardly the demeanor of men on the verge of quitting. O'Malley pressed for proof. When he asked to see the farewell letters, Margaret Walsh claimed they were private and not kept in official records. Academic files were shown, but the priest noticed many entries appeared written in the same hand, with identical ink, as if they'd been created all at once. His most chilling discovery came when he traced older cases through church records. Several families had never heard from their sons again, not a letter, not a rumor, nothing. After the initial notice from St. Thomas, many had tried to track them down without success. The Walsh family recognized the danger. James Walsh began whispering that O'Malley was unstable, driven by a personal vendetta. Anonymous letters soon reached the priest, warning that if he continued, his safety and his career were in jeopardy. The breaking point came when O'Malley demanded to inspect the basement, claiming he had reason to believe students were being held there. Michael Walsh resisted, citing medical safety and ongoing research. But when O'Malley threatened to involve civil authorities, Walsh relented on his terms. The tour was carefully staged. The priest was shown only clean, legitimate spaces, storerooms, supply areas, and a standard anatomy lab with legally obtained cadavers. James Walsh walked him through preservation techniques he described as common in Europe. The hidden chamber, accessible only through the bookshelf in James's office, remained unseen. Without tangible proof, O'Malley's investigation ended, but he left St. Thomas with a deep sense that something was terribly wrong. Father O'Malley's report to the Catholic authorities in Baltimore was pointed. He urged closer supervision of St. Thomas and highlighted the troubling rate of unexplained student departures. But the Walsh family's prestige, coupled with their deep ties to the Catholic medical network, ensured his concerns were quietly filed away. Still, the scare had forced a shift in strategy. The Walshes trimmed their kill rate from 6 victims a year to 4, spacing the disappearances farther apart and weaving more elaborate backstories for each withdrawal. Victims were increasingly chosen from distant towns, making it even harder for families to investigate. At the same time, they built a network of trusted informants in the community, eyes and ears, ready to report on any sign of outside inquiry. Diversification followed. By 1815, St. Thomas was not only supplying Europe, but also shipping to medical institutions in the Caribbean and South America. The broader market allowed prices to climb, and the Walshes became more selective, targeting young, healthy men whose bodies would yield the most pristine specimens. By 1820, the operation was a polished, international enterprise, generating staggering profits while preserving its outward image as a Catholic beacon of education. But their reputation, especially in European medical circles, began to spark a new, dangerous kind of curiosity. That autumn, Dr. Heinrich Zimmermann, a respected German anatomist from the University of Heidelberg, arrived in Baltimore. For 2 years, he had been purchasing specimens from St. Thomas and considered them the finest preserved bodies he had ever examined. His purpose now was simple: to witness these remarkable preservation methods firsthand. For the Walsh family, Zimmermann's visit was a crisis. They couldn't allow anyone to see the true process, which began with murder. Yet they didn't dare offend a client who had already spent $15,000 and could connect them with even more prestigious European buyers. They decided on an elaborate charade. James Walsh prepared a staged demonstration in the school's legitimate anatomy lab using the donated body of an elderly man who had died naturally. He walked Zimmermann through a mix of genuine embalming steps and invented innovations, claiming that the region's climate and his privileged access to parish deaths gave him unmatched freshness in specimens. Zimmermann, polite but skeptical, spotted flaws immediately. The preservation techniques he was shown could never account for the flawless specimens he had been receiving. Those bodies bore none of the subtle decomposition seen in natural deaths. When he pressed James for more specifics, the American grew guarded, citing proprietary secrets. The German began his own quiet probe. He spoke with students, examined storerooms, and pored over harbor records. What he found was damning. St. Thomas had shipped over 200 preserved bodies to Europe in the past 20 years, an impossible figure for such a small school, even with hospital and parish connections. Stranger still, some destinations had no record of ordering from the Walshes at all. Michael Walsh moved swiftly. On the night of October 15, 1820, Zimmermann was invited to a special demonstration in the basement, one that would, they promised, finally reveal the family's most guarded preservation secrets. Instead, he was handed a chloroform-soaked cloth, presented as part of an anesthetic demonstration. The dose was carefully measured, lethal, but slow, giving him no chance to resist. The killing marked a turning point. Zimmermann was no poor, isolated student. He was a respected European physician, with influential colleagues. His disappearance would be noticed. The Walshes spun a new fiction. A sudden family emergency had called him back to Germany. They produced forged travel documents and witnesses who claimed to have seen him boarding a ship to Hamburg. Preserving Zimmermann posed new challenges. He was older, his body marked by disease and injury. James Walsh experimented with chemical blends he had been developing in secret, restoring the body to an almost youthful state. The work took weeks. Eventually, the finished specimen was crated and shipped, ironically, to the University of Edinburgh. There, the faculty marveled at its quality. Students dissected the German doctor without ever knowing they were examining the remains of a man who had come seeking answers about the very body now on their table. The murder of Dr. Zimmermann had given the Walsh family a dangerous sense of invincibility. They had convinced themselves that no matter who stood in their way, they could remove the threat without consequence. This arrogance pushed them into greater risks, making them blind to the determination of those who would not stop until their crimes were exposed. In the spring of 1834, the first real danger emerged from a man they had never expected to face again, Thomas Mackenzie, the former roommate of Patrick O'Brien. Mackenzie, now a respected physician in Philadelphia, had never forgotten the strange circumstances of Patrick's disappearance 35 years earlier. Over time, he had quietly followed other cases of students who had supposedly left St. Thomas under similar circumstances and found an unsettling pattern. Through contacts in Catholic parishes across the Northeast, Mackenzie identified more than 40 families whose sons had allegedly abandoned their studies but had vanished completely, leaving no trace and sending no word home. The turning point came when Mackenzie crossed paths with Dr. Wilhelm Schneider, a German physician who had studied in Edinburgh. Schneider had been puzzled by the preserved cadavers sent from an American school, always from St. Thomas, that arrived in immaculate condition, unlike anything produced by known preservation methods in Europe. Examining dozens of these specimens, Schneider noticed 3 disturbing consistencies. Each body showed flawless preservation, without the slightest hint of natural decay. Nearly all were healthy young men, aged between 18 and 25, and many bore subtle signs of respiratory failure, without any disease or injury to explain it. The damage to the lung tissue suggested death by chemical asphyxiation. When Schneider shared his findings, Mackenzie realized they had uncovered undeniable evidence of systematic murder. Together, they began a deeper investigation, poring over Baltimore Harbor shipping logs. What they found was staggering. Over 400 preserved bodies shipped to Europe between 1798 and 1834, an impossible number for any legitimate institution. The shipments reached dozens of medical schools across the continent, revealing a network far larger than anyone had imagined. By July 1834, Mackenzie and Schneider arrived at St. Thomas posing as representatives of European universities, requesting a full tour and a live demonstration of the school's preservation process. The Walsh family recognized Mackenzie immediately and understood the threat he posed, but they could not simply refuse without inviting suspicion. Instead, Michael Walsh extended a dangerous invitation, a private demonstration scheduled for the evening of July 23rd, in the most secretive part of the university's basement. What the Walshes did not know was that their guests had prepared for this very scenario. Before arriving, Mackenzie and Schneider had given all their findings to trusted contacts in Philadelphia and Baltimore, with instructions to investigate immediately if they did not return. The evidence was secured in multiple hidden locations, ensuring it would survive even if they did not. That night, the 2 men stepped into the concealed laboratory, the same hidden chamber, where 156 young men had been murdered over the past 36 years. Dissection tables gleamed under lamplight, surgical tools lay in readiness, and meticulous ledgers documented each victim alongside the institutions that had purchased their remains. Dr. James Walsh moved to subdue them with chloroform, just as he had done with every victim before. But this time, the would-be victims were ready. Armed and prepared, they fought back. The struggle was violent and chaotic, ending with James Walsh dead from a gunshot wound and both investigators badly injured. The sound of the gunshot drew students and faculty into the hidden chamber, where they were met with a nightmare-preserved human remains, blood-stained surgical instruments, and undeniable proof of decades of organized murder. The investigation that followed revealed the full scale of the horror. From 1798 to 1834, 156 students had been killed, their bodies preserved and sold for a profit exceeding $800,000, the equivalent of nearly $25 million today. Every detail was recorded in the Walsh family's ledgers, from the victims' identities to the amounts paid by European buyers. News of the scandal spread like wildfire, sending shockwaves through the medical communities of America and Europe. The revelation that a respected Catholic medical school had operated as a killing ground for profit shattered trust in the very institutions charged with advancing the healing arts, leaving a dark stain on the history of medical education that would never be erased. The investigation that followed peeled back layers of corruption and complicity that reached far beyond the Walsh family, shaking the foundations of medical education forever. Dr. Michael Walsh and his wife, Margaret, were swiftly taken into custody, charged with multiple counts of murder, conspiracy, and fraud. What followed was one of the most sensational trials in American history, drawing intense attention from across the United States and Europe. Prosecutors laid out devastating evidence, meticulously kept ledgers detailing each victim, every transaction with European medical schools, and the staggering profits these killings had generated. The defense tried to twist the narrative, claiming that the Walsh family's actions were born of desperation, the impossible demands of medical education, and the lack of lawful access to human bodies for study. They painted the murders as mercy killings, sparing struggling students, the shame of failure, while supposedly advancing medical science. But this facade crumbled under the prosecution's proof that the true motive was profit. Obscene amounts of it. Margaret Walsh proved herself the most defiant of the two. In court, she showed no hint of remorse. Instead, she boasted of the medical training St. Thomas had offered, and of the role their specimens had played in shaping European surgical education. In her mind, these young men had achieved immortality for a higher cause. Testimony revealed chilling details about how the victims had been chosen. The Walsh family preyed on students from poor, faraway homes, those whose families lacked the means to investigate if they vanished. Detailed psychological profiles were kept, pinpointing those who were isolated, homesick, or struggling, making them easy to manipulate, and easier still to erase. Surviving students spoke of the uneasy atmosphere that gripped St. Thomas. Whispers of strange noises drifting from the basement at night, the careful avoidance of certain faculty members, the unspoken fear that being alone in the wrong place at the wrong time could mean you'd never be seen again. The revelations didn't stop at America's borders. It emerged that some of Europe's most prestigious medical institutions, the University of Edinburgh, the University of Paris, the Royal College of Surgeons in London, had unknowingly purchased the bodies of murder victims for decades. The shock in Europe was immediate. Schools demanded rigorous proof of where their anatomical specimens came from. Collections were re-examined, and in some cases, memorial services were held for the nameless young men whose bodies had been stolen and sold in the name of science. Financial records painted the scale of greed in cold numbers: over $800,000, earned in 36 years, the modern equivalent of nearly $25 million. The money had been hidden in properties, shipping companies, and European banks, all tied to the bloody trade. By November 1834, both Michael and Margaret were found guilty on all charges. On December 15th, before a crowd of more than 3,000, they were hanged, becoming some of the first Americans executed for crimes. Linked to medical education. For the victims' families, the truth brought both relief and torment. Many had spent decades searching for answers. Now they had them, but the horror of knowing was its own wound. Some sought damages from the Walsh estate, others simply fought to reclaim and bury their sons' remains. Many bodies shipped to Europe years before would never be found. The university itself was shuttered permanently. Its buildings were torn down, the land sold to unsuspecting farmers, yet locals swore the ground remained cursed. Strange noises, eerie shadows, and an unease that lingered long after the walls were gone. The Walsh case left deep scars on the world of medicine. In America, new laws demanded strict documentation for every cadaver, ensuring bodies came from lawful sources. Medical schools turned to alternative teaching methods, model skeletons, and fewer dissections. In Europe, institutions overhauled their procurement policies, determined never to unknowingly buy another murder victim. The psychological toll was enormous. Doctors trained on St. Thomas specimens now wondered if their skill had been purchased at the cost of innocent lives. Some left the profession altogether, unable to reconcile their calling to heal with their unwitting part in a decades-long killing machine. The scandal shattered public trust. Parents everywhere began questioning the safety of distant schools, demanding better oversight. The church itself was forced to confront the fact that these atrocities had been carried out within a Catholic institution. Stricter inspections, tighter financial monitoring, and deeper scrutiny became mandatory for Catholic-run schools. The discovery of the Walsh family's hidden records offered historians a rare, grim blueprint of systematic murder with victim lists, coded correspondence, financial ledgers, and advanced preservation notes, decades ahead of their time. Though these techniques would later be studied and adapted for legitimate science, they would forever carry the taint of the horrors from which they came, in the end. The Walsh case became a warning carved in history, that even the most respected institutions can rot from within, when greed overrides morality, and when oversight fails. It showed how easily the pursuit of knowledge can be twisted into a mask for unspeakable crimes. What about you? Do you think every secret of St. Thomas was truly unearthed, or could other schools have hidden histories just as dark?